The Washington Post just broke a shocking, I guess it's shocking, a shocking news story about Robert Mueller and the Mueller report and what apparently Robert Mueller believes was the botched handling of his findings and his report on his investigation by Trump administration Attorney General William Barr. Now, I say this is shocking. That said, we had seen some rumblings along these lines soon after Mueller turned in his report at the end of March, right? Newly appointed Trump Attorney General William Barr then started serially releasing multiple statements of his own that he characterized as summaries of Mueller's findings, peppered with his own fulsome musings on the fundamental innocence and good character of President Trump, right? But on April 3rd, you might remember that there were some inklings that something like this might be going on behind the scenes. On April 3rd, the Washington Post and the New York Times both reported that some personnel from the special counsel's office were expressing shock and anger at the way Barr was presenting Mueller's findings and the way he was substituting his own assertions about Mueller's investigation for the actual findings and the actual language produced by Mueller's team. I mean, you'll remember those stories from that first week in April, right? Members of special counsel Robert Mueller's team have told associates they are frustrated with the limited information Attorney General Barr has provided about their nearly 2-year investigation. Members of Mueller's team have complained to close associates that the evidence they gathered on obstruction was alarming and significant. Quote, it was much more acute than Barr suggested. At one time, one U.S. official briefed on the matter told reporters for the Washington Post, quote, there was immediate displeasure from Mueller's team when they saw how the Attorney General had characterized their work instead of him just releasing Mueller's own written summaries, which he had prepared about his own findings, which were prepared for public release. Since that reporting in the first week of April, we have been able to see the redacted version of Mueller's report that Barr allowed to be released. One of the striking things that a lot of people noticed immediately upon receiving that report was that there was a narrative, detailed, easy to read, thoroughly damning executive summary at the start of each section of the report. And despite the fact that there were myriad redactions throughout the rest of Mueller's report, those executive summaries had almost nothing redacted. I mean, even under whatever redaction scheme Barr insisted on, those executive summaries, they were like 99% cleared to go to the public with nothing redacted at all. So why did Attorney General William Barr give his, speeches and hold his press conferences and make his no collusion announcements and write his own summaries that he said shouldn't be called summaries? Why did he make all of these different efforts to characterize the Mueller report when we quickly learned they were mischaracterizations, right? The things that he said about Mueller's report were very quickly exposed as, the charitable word would be misleading characterizations of what Mueller actually found. Well, now there is this new report, pretty stunning report from the Washington Post tonight. New York Times has a version of this story as well. The NBC News has also followed up on some of this reporting since the Post's initial story, but the Post was first. And they've actually got a lot more detail about what they're reporting here tonight, which is that Mueller himself has apparently gone on the record in writing, mad as heck, about what William Barr did with his findings, about what William Barr did with the results and the written report prepared by Mueller and his team about their investigation. Washington Post reporting tonight that they have obtained the letter sent by Mueller to Attorney General William Barr on March 27th. So in terms of the timeline here, that's obviously after Mueller submitted his report, and it's just after Barr publicly released his 4-page letter explaining that Mueller's report totally exonerated the president, but we couldn't see the report yet. He'd be working on redacting it from here on out. But obviously, this letter from Mueller was in response to how Barr had characterized Mueller's findings. It was before Mueller's redacted report was released to the public. The Washington Post says it has obtained this letter. They haven't published the letter itself, but they do describe it here, and they quote from it pretty extensively. Quote, at the time the letter was sent, on March 27th, Barr had announced that Mueller had not found a conspiracy between the Trump campaign and Russian officials seeking to interfere in the 2016 presidential election. Barr also said Mueller had not reached a conclusion about whether Trump had tried to obstruct justice, but Barr reviewed the evidence and found it insufficient to support such a charge. Days after that announcement from Barr, Robert Mueller himself wrote a previously unknown private letter to the Justice Department, which revealed a degree of dissatisfaction with the public discussion of Mueller's work, a degree of dissatisfaction that shocked senior Justice Department officials. And then the Washington Post quotes from that letter that Robert Mueller sent. Quote, the summary letter the department sent to Congress and released to the public late in the afternoon of March 24th did not fully capture the context, nature, and substance of this office's work and conclusions. Quote, there is now public confusion about critical aspects of the results of our investigation. This threatens to undermine a central purpose for which the department appointed a special counsel, which is to assure the full public confidence which is to assure full public confidence in the outcome of the investigations. Mueller's letter then made a key request that Barr release the report's introductions and executive summaries. Mueller's letter also made some initial suggested redactions for doing so. In his letter, Mueller wrote that the redaction process, which was then underway, quote, need not delay release of the enclosed materials. Release at this time would alleviate the misunderstandings that have arisen and would answer congressional and public questions about the nature and outcome of our investigation. Right? And so, I mean, Mueller is saying there to Barr, and that's a quote from Mueller's letter, according to the Washington Post, saying there that Congress and the public have been misled as to what his investigation found. And the summary materials that were included in part of his report were intended for release for the purposes of informing the public and the Congress what the special counsel's investigation found. According to the way this letter is phrased, according to these quotes from the Washington Post, it appears that Mueller prepared minor redactions to those summaries such that they could be released immediately. I mean, we know, of course, by the way this unfolded, that Barr, sent out the president is exonerated letter on March 24th. March 27th, Mueller sends this letter, hair on fire, saying, what are you doing? That's not what our findings say at all. Here, I've done the redactions and the introductions and executive summaries. Here, you can release these. The public and Congress should see these. These are our real findings, not what you're saying. We know from what happened then in real life that Barr did no such thing. The Justice Department gave the Washington Post a statement in response to this reporting tonight saying Attorney General Barr ultimately determined it would not be productive to release the report in piecemeal fashion. So Barr refuses to release the introductions and the executive summaries, which Mueller has requested that he has done, which Mueller has prepared specially redacted versions of so they can be released to the public and to Congress. Barr says, no, I'm not going to release those, and instead lets his own introductions and executive summaries and feelings about the report, which completely misrepresented Mueller's findings, linger out there for weeks. And again, this is first reported tonight by the Washington Post, reporters Devlin Barrett and Matt Zapotosky. NBC's Pete Williams was subsequently able to confirm the story, reporting that Mueller conveyed to Barr in both a letter and a subsequent phone call that Barr's description of what he called the report's principal conclusions didn't actually capture the substance of what Mueller found. Barr, of course, is scheduled to testify tomorrow in the Republican-led Senate Judiciary Committee, where Chairman Lindsey Graham has already said he considers the Mueller report to be overdone. He's never going to touch it again. Barr right now is still fighting an effort to appear the following day, on Thursday, before the Judiciary Committee in the House, where the Democratic-led committee there intends to have some of the questioning of Barr led by staff counsel, by professional attorneys who work for the committee, rather than only having him questioned by members of Congress. William Barr apparently does not want to subject himself to that. Starting to get a sense of why that might seem like an unfun way to spend a Thursday, if you're William Barr. I will say this news tonight from the Washington Post also puts a much hotter spotlight on the requests by a dozen Democratic senators today that the Inspector General at the Justice Department should investigate William Barr and the way he handled Mueller's findings, including whether his letter purporting to summarize Mueller's findings and his ridiculous press conference ahead of releasing Mueller's report were, quote, misleading. and whether they were consistent with Justice Department policies and practices. Those dozen senators are also asking the Justice Department Inspector General to look at whether Barr's handling of the Mueller report has been so improper that Barr should no longer be allowed to oversee any prosecutions that spring from that report. They want the IG to look at whether Barr has, quote, demonstrated sufficient impartiality to continue overseeing the ongoing matters related to the special counsel's investigation that were referenced in Appendix D of the special counsel's report. You remember Appendix D, right? That's where we got those 14 matters that are ongoing criminal cases that have derived from Mueller's findings, 12 of which are still redacted from public view. If Mueller, as the Washington Post is reporting tonight, has told William Barr that Barr has misrepresented his findings, mishandled the findings of this investigation, given Congress and the public an inaccurate summary, an inaccurate characterization of what it is that Mueller found and the results of that inquiry, should Barr really be overseeing all of the prosecutions that derive from that inquiry that are still open criminal matters? And if this is in fact what happened, if Mueller called Barr and wrote Barr a letter right after Barr put out his supposed summary of what Mueller found and said, hey, you are getting it wrong, that is not what we found at all. If we can't trust you to accurately summarize our materials, then put out our own materials. Here's the summary. They're redacted for public view. Send these out. If that conversation happened, both in writing and then on the phone between Mueller and Barr on or about the 27th of March, why is it that a few weeks later, April 10th, Barr testified under oath in the U.S. Senate that he had no idea whether or not Mueller had any problem whatsoever, whether he had any objections whatsoever with how Barr had handled his findings? Joining us now is Devlin Barrett from The Washington Post. He was first to report tonight on this confrontation by Special Counsel Mueller directed at the Attorney General over how Barr handled this. Devlin, congratulations on this scoop. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for having me, Rachel.
Let me ask if I summarized your report. I didn't summarize every aspect of what you guys found tonight, but let me ask if I was accurate in the way that I described the nature of this communication between Mueller toward Barr.
Yeah, I think that's right. There was a letter that was obviously fairly harshly worded and caught senior Justice Department officials by surprise. And then there was a follow-up phone call, which has been described to me as not quite as confrontational, but still an area where these two guys really significantly disagreed.
I know that you have reported that you have seen this letter from Mueller to Barr, and obviously you quote from it extensively in tonight in your piece in the Post. Are you going to publish the full letter? Is it your understanding that it could be published?
Yeah, that's the one thing I would correct in what you said. I don't have a copy of the letter. I have read the letter, and obviously I quote extensively from it. So I'll publish it as soon as I have a hard copy, but I don't have a hard copy yet. And frankly, look, I think given the context in which this comes out, that there's a hearing tomorrow, I think we're going to see this letter tomorrow. Okay.
I know that we're going to hear from Barr tomorrow in the Senate. One of the other things that immediately becomes much more pressing, given your reporting tonight, is the question of whether or not Congress is also going to hear from Robert Mueller. We know that the Judiciary Committee in the House has explicitly recommended or explicitly requested that Mueller himself come testify, and he come testify before, I think they set a deadline of May 23rd. We haven't had any further clarity as to whether or not that's actually going to happen. Barr is on record saying that he would not object to such testimony. Do you have any reporting or any further understanding as to whether or not Mueller will be ever speaking for himself on this matter?
I don't have a definitive answer. I will say my sense before all this was that there is almost no way in which Mueller does not get called to testify at some point. I would say after this letter, there's no way that Mueller does not get called to testify. I just don't think the politics of it are remotely practical for Mueller to try not to testify or for DOJ to try to prevent from testifying, even if they wanted to do that, which they say they don't.
You know, we have known from previous reporting from the Post, among others, that there were people in the special counsel's office, people on the special counsel's team who were upset with the way Attorney General Barr was handling that report. We had these descriptions about members of the special counsel's team speaking to associates or known to be upset about the way he was handling it. At the time those reports came out in the first week of April, that would have been after this report went from Mueller to Barr and after Barr had been informed directly in writing by Mueller and in a phone call from Mueller about how upset he was about how Barr was handling it. What changed so that this letter from Mueller, which wasn't previously reporting, is now in some circulation? You were able to describe it and quote from it tonight. What changed?
honestly, I think the pressure of, a congressional hearing in which these questions are going to come up. I mean, part of how this all happens is because as a reporter heading toward this hearing, we're asking all these questions and we're trying to figure out, what are you going to say when they ask, was there a disagreement about this? Because obviously we've reported there was something of a disagreement here. So I think the writing was on the wall in some sense as far as the hearing goes. And, hearings have a way of, shaking things out.
One last question for you, Devlin. Is one of the quotes that you have from the letter tonight landed kind of with a lot of weight for me. You quote from Robert Mueller's letter, "There is now public confusion about critical aspects of the results of our investigation. This threatens to undermine essential purpose for which the Department of Justice appointed the special counsel, which is to assure full public confidence in the outcome of the investigations." That's worded in a very specific and sort of legalistic way, sort of tight wording there. But the implication of that is heavy. The implication of that, as I read it, is that the public shouldn't have full confidence in the outcome of the investigations, that Barr had so mishandled this matter that the public shouldn't trust the way the government was coping with the findings of this investigation. I mean, I don't want to put more weight on it than you think was intended by the way that Mueller put that. So I just wanted to let you know my impression there and see how that strikes you.
So I think there's some truth to that, but I think one of the things you have to keep in mind is when he talks about the full public confidence, that's always been a central compass point for Bob Mueller as he goes through this. He's always felt that this work only matters if the public believes the work was done well. And I think that's why he writes the letter. And I think as I read the letter, what he's saying is, I am worried that this public discussion of the obstruction issue, because this is really about the obstruction part, this public discussion, he thinks, is getting off the rails, and he wants Barr to help him, in his mind, get it back on the rails. Now, obviously, Barr and him disagree about a lot of key issues here, so it's a tension point that doesn't really ultimately get resolved. But I do think what Mueller is trying to say here is we don't want to let this thing get out of our control and leave the public with an understanding of this that ultimately doesn't ring true to what we did.
I said that was my last question. I lied. I also have to ask you, there's a reference to the redaction process in here. Is it your understanding, Are you getting a sense that there was conflict between the special counsel and the Attorney General's office over the redactions and what was cut out of the report?
Yeah, I think there was, but maybe not in the sense you mean. So what I've been told is that Justice Department officials, when they were waiting for the report, they expected they would get, if not like suggested redactions, then some sort of, trail map that would help them work on the redaction process. They say they didn't get anything like that, and that was frustrating, and it meant that they had 448 pages to suddenly, cycle through with every page marked, this could require redactions. However, as the process goes forward, what you see in the Mueller letter is Mueller sends with the letter, and I think this is a really important part, Mueller sends with the letter the executive summaries and the introductions with some proposed redactions. And Mueller is, I think, very clearly trying to egg this process forward and say, look, you can put out these parts now, and here are some of the things you should keep out. Now, from the DOJ senior leadership point of view, they had a little bit of concern about that because to them, those suggested redactions, while slight, weren't every category of redaction, and they felt they still had significant more work to do if they were going to release those. Obviously, again, another significant issue of disagreement, and it matters a great deal, obviously, in terms of the consequences. Right,
and it matters in terms of what we, the public, are ultimately going to understand about this, particularly because special counsel's office staff were involved in the redaction process, at least according to the way that Barr described it. And so if Justice Department officials, either anonymously or not, are trying to characterize that process in a way that people from the special counsel's office are going to contest, it's starting to feel more and more like we'll ultimately learn their side of the story too, at least if the kind of reporting that you did tonight is any prologue. Devlin Barrett, congratulations on this scoop tonight. Thank you for being here to talk about it. I really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me.
Devlin is a national security reporter at the Washington Post. And again, he and Matt Zapotosky first to report tonight on this apparently angry confrontation by special counsel Robert Mueller directed at Attorney General William Barr over the way he handled the Mueller report. Again, a letter being sent from Mueller to Attorney General Barr telling him basically release these parts of my report rather than continuing to mischaracterize my findings. I should note that one of the things that we can add to this reporting tonight is that as of tonight, Robert Mueller is still an employee of the Department of Justice, which is an interesting thing. Peter Carr, the spokesman for the special counsel, told us tonight, we called him after this, or we contacted him after this reporting broke tonight. We called him to find out whether or not Mueller is still a DOJ employee. He told us tonight that Mueller remains a Justice Department employee for now, but that Mueller, quote, will be concluding his service within the coming days. That's something that they told us right around the time that the report came out. They say that advice is still operative, but to the extent that it matters who's actually Robert Mueller's employer at this point, if this confrontation is getting to be this heated and this direct, he still belongs to DOJ. Stay with us.
Hey there, I'm Chris Hayes from MSNBC. Thanks for watching MSNBC on YouTube. If you want to keep up to date with the videos we're putting out, you can click subscribe just below me or click over on this list to see lots of other great videos.